Unit Y, be advised, resident reports suspicious vehicle, dark sedan, heading north on Oak.
I've been a deputy with the Bergen County Sheriff's Department for a little over 2 years now. Most of my shifts are night work, quiet, uneventful, the kind where the biggest enemy is staying awake. Northeastern Bergen County isn't exactly a hotbed of crime. You get the occasional DUI, a loud house party that got out of hand, maybe a domestic that needs de-escalating. That's about it. I grew up one town over, so I know every back road, every dead-end street, and every stretch of thick, endless woods that swallow the edges of these expensive, secluded neighborhoods. My partner on the night in question was Officer Miller, 15 years on the job, the most unflappable guy I've ever met. Nothing rattled him. Not fights, not blood, not even the time we pulled a guy out of a wreck who was missing half his face. Miller just chewed his gum, did the paperwork, and moved on. It was a random Tuesday in late October, cold enough that the heat in the cruiser actually felt good. Around 2:15 a.m., dispatch sent us to a 911 hang-up. Caller reported one blood-curdling female scream, then the line went dead. The address was way out on the northern fringe of the township, one of those sprawling multi-million-dollar homes that backs right up to state forest land. No neighbors for half a mile in any direction. Miller groaned through a mouthful of cold pizza. Rich people arguing at 2 in the morning, my favorite. I wasn't so sure. A scream that specific, followed by a cut line. That's rarely just a marital spat. The house sat at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, completely dark. No porch light, no glow from any window, no cars in the circular drive. It looked abandoned. The second we stepped out of the cruiser, the temperature felt like it dropped another 10 degrees. The air was thick, damp, and unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no wind, nothing. I told Miller to hold up. Something felt wrong. We did a slow perimeter walk, flashlights cutting through the blackness. When I rounded the back corner, I saw it. The rear door stood ajar, just a couple inches. Not smashed, not forced, just open, like someone wanted us to notice. I keyed my radio. Back door's unsecured. Miller met me there a second later. We announced ourselves loud and clear, standard procedure, then pushed inside, weapons drawn. The place was gutted. No furniture, no rugs, no pictures on the walls. Just bare hardwood, fresh paint, and the faint smell of sawdust mixed with something metallic I couldn't place. It felt less like a house and more like a hollow shell waiting for someone to move in, or for something else. We cleared the downstairs room by room. Everything is empty, cold, lifeless. Then we reached a small study at the very back, the one room that actually looked used. A single ergonomic chair faced a heavy wooden desk that sat right in front of a sealed window overlooking the pitch-black tree line. On the desk, a high-end digital recorder, an audio mixer, and a large parabolic microphone rigged to feed through a custom hole in the window frame. The dish was aimed not at any neighboring house, but straight into the heart of the forest. Next to the equipment was an open spiral notebook. The handwriting inside was frantic. Pages filled with timestamps, scribbled observations, phrases like response pattern, echo delay, authentic reaction required. I looked at the recorder. The playback light glowed steady green. I hit stop, rewound a few seconds, and pressed play. A woman's scream, raw, piercing, absolutely real, filled the room. It looped again immediately. Same scream, same intensity. Miller holstered his gun and shrugged. There's your 911 call. Some sound design nerd left his horror Foley reel blasting. Neighbor heard it, freaked out, called it in. Let's find the owner and go home. But something about it didn't sit right. The parabolic mic was for capturing distant sound, not playing it back inside the house. And why aim it at miles of empty woods? I walked to the window. The blinds were thin plastic slats. When I pulled them aside, my own pale face stared back at me from the black glass. Miller, this setup isn't for recording sound effects. It's for listening. And that scream, it's being used as bait. He started to answer, but I was already heading for the stairs. We needed to clear the rest of the house. Upstairs, more nothingness. One bedroom had a bare mattress on the floor and a half-empty water bottle. That was it. We were halfway back down the stairs when it happened. 3 soft, deliberate metallic taps coming from the attached garage we'd already checked and cleared 20 minutes earlier. Miller froze mid-step. For the first time all night, the color drained from his face. We never locked the interior garage door behind us. The tapping started again, slower this time, closer to the door at the foot of the stairs, like someone on the other side dragging a key across the knob. Testing. Then absolute silence. We waited, guns up, lights trained on that door. 10 seconds. 20. From the study behind us came the sharp, unmistakable click of the exterior deadbolt sliding home. Someone had just locked us inside the house. The click of that deadbolt sliding home echoed like a judge's gavel. Final. No appeal. Miller's eyes went wide in the dark. Back door, move. We bolted down the stairs, boots pounding on bare hardwood. The woman's scream kept looping from the study, tinny and indifferent, like a broken smoke alarm. I hit the rear door with everything I had. Handle wouldn't budge. Deadbolt thrown from the outside. Miller grabbed my arm before I could put a round through the glass. We don't know how many are out there. We break a window, we lose cover. Cover. The word almost made me laugh. The house was empty. There was nothing to hide behind. Then the tapping started again, only this time it wasn't coming from the garage anymore. It was coming from the office speakers, clear and crisp, mixed right into the scream loop. Our own sounds fed back to us. The recorder was being triggered live, and then my own voice filled the room, calm and clueless, from 20 minutes earlier. Miller, hold up. No lights, no vehicles. This doesn't look like a party or a fight. It looks empty. A perfect playback of the exact moment we stepped out of the cruiser. The parabolic mic hadn't been pointed at the woods at all. It had been picking us up the entire time, through the walls, through the open back door, maybe even through the damn cruiser's open window. Miller's voice next. Back door's unsecured, man. I'm going to check the entry point. Then mine again, quieter, almost whispering. Why use a scream as bait, Miller? The playback cut to dead air, replaced by a long, slow shh, like someone hushing a child, or telling us to shut up. Miller's face was gray. He's been here the whole time, listening, directing. I didn't answer. I was already moving. I kicked the hollow office door so hard the frame exploded inward. Flashlights swept the room. Empty. The recorder sat alone on the desk, the playback light glowing green. The notebook lay open beside it. A new line had been added in fresh ink, the letters tall and shaky. You didn't scream. Not a question, a statement, a disappointed review. That was the moment the fear flipped into something hotter. This wasn't about hurting us. This was about recording the perfect reaction. The scream was the lure, the empty house, the stage, and we were the actors who kept refusing to give him the take he wanted. Miller saw it at the same time I did. Windows. Now, we didn't discuss it. We found the only casement window that actually opened, swung it wide, and punched the screen out. Glass exploded as we climbed through anyway, cutting my forearm on the way down. I didn't feel it. We hit the wet grass, rolled, came up running. We didn't stop until we crashed through the tree line and slammed into the side of the cruiser. I was shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. The second I got the door open, we dove in, locked it, and I floored it down the driveway. Lights and sirens screaming into the night like that would do anything. 10 miles later, we pulled into a 24-hour diner lot, left the engine running, and just sat there breathing like we'd run a marathon. Miller stared straight ahead, knuckles white on the dash. For the first time in the 2 years I'd known him, he looked old. We called it in. Tactical team rolled out heavy rifles. K9, the works. House was empty when they got there. Back door standing wide open again, like it had never been locked. All the recording gear? Gone. Notebook? Gone. The only thing they found was the kicked-in office door, the broken window, and a single coffee mug on the desk. Property records showed the house belonged to some LLC out of Delaware, bank-owned. Staged for sale. No tenants, no alarm system, no cameras. They wrote it up as an elaborate trespassing prank by persons unknown. Case closed in 72 hours. Miller took 2 weeks of vacation after that. When he came back, he requested day shift only. Never talked about it again. Me? I still work nights. Same sector, same back roads. Sometimes, when it's really quiet and the radio's nothing but static, I swear I hear it 3 soft metallic taps coming through the speaker. Not loud, just enough to remind me. He never got the scream he wanted that night. I think he's still out there, somewhere in those woods, waiting for the next performance. After the incident with the watcher in the woods, I took a few days off. Miller had requested a transfer to day shifts almost immediately, citing the need for a change of pace. I couldn't blame him. That call had cracked the professional shell we all wear. I was paired with Officer Rodriguez Young, maybe 6 months out of the academy, and an overreactor who saw every loose dog as a potential armed confrontation. I needed calm. I got anxiety wrapped in a uniform. We were working a late Saturday night, the kind of night where the calls usually revolve around noise complaints and drunk driving. My reflection kept nagging at me. The fear of being recorded, of having my panic cataloged by a stranger. It made every routine stop feel like a potential trap. Around 1:30 a.m., dispatch sent us on a welfare check that had been upgraded. The address was an older, unassuming, 2-story house in one of the denser, older neighborhoods, the kind with small yards and houses built too close together. The house itself had been the source of what dispatch called a persistent nuisance. For the past month, they'd received multiple silent 911 calls from the landline, all disconnected instantly. Low priority, no voice, just an annoyance. Tonight, however, a neighbor had called to report a clearly open front door and an unnervingly flickering light upstairs. Finally, a call with a pulse, Rodriguez mumbled, adjusting his utility belt for the 5th time. Probably just kids playing ding-dong ditch and forgot to close the door when they ran. He was trying to sound confident, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the cruiser door handle. I parked the car. The house was a pale yellow, its paint peeling like old skin. The front door was definitely open, a thin black line against the yellow frame, and the light upstairs pulsed with an unhealthy, rhythmic flicker. Not a steady electrical short, but more like a broken pulse. We approached slowly. Check the perimeter, Rodriguez. Just a quick walk around before we go in. It's wide open, Sarge. Why bother? Procedure, Rodriguez. And this place feels wrong. Too quiet for an open door in this neighborhood. The walk around revealed nothing. No open windows, no signs of forced entry, no cars. The yard was tidy, if a little overgrown. When we finally stood at the threshold, I pushed the door gently inward. It scraped against the wooden floorboards with a dry, protesting shriek. "Sheriff's Department, is anyone home?" I called out, my hand resting on my sidearm. Silence. The house smelled faintly of dust, old wood, and something metallic, maybe rust, or maybe just my own rising sense of dread. The entryway was small, but immediately, I noticed the first impossible thing. The living room was small, a cramped square, yet there were 5 doors leading off it. 5. Not counting the front door or the entry to the kitchen, which was visible down a short hall. 5 interior doors, all closed, all painted the same shade of faded white, in a room that should have contained a sofa and a television. "What is this place, a closet factory?" Rodriguez whispered, pulling out his flashlight. We cleared the living room first, checking behind the furniture, a single, dust-covered armchair and a small side table. Nothing. Then we started with the doors, moving clockwise. Door Hasson. A small, walk-in pantry, empty except for a few cobwebs. Door hash 2. A coat closet, empty. Door hash 3. The staircase to the 2nd floor. That explained the flickering light. Door hash 4. A very short, dead-end hallway, containing a small, windowless bathroom. Then we came to door hash 5. It was placed awkwardly, near a corner, and looked like an afterthought. I nodded to Rodriguez. He braced himself, then swung the door open, a light beam cutting into the darkness. It wasn't a closet or a pantry. It was a hallway, a long, narrow, dark hallway that stretched far enough back into the house that it should have extended into the neighbor's property. "That's not right," Rodriguez said, his voice high with alarm. "That wall is the edge of the house. That hallway shouldn't exist." I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. I walked to the window on that side of the house and looked out. The hallway should have been visible from the outside, but I saw only the peeling yellow siding and the narrow space between the houses. "Stay alert," I commanded. "We follow the line. Maybe it's a poorly constructed addition." But it can't be, I thought. The dimensions were completely wrong. We moved slowly down the impossible hallway. It was colder here, and the air was dead. The floorboards didn't creak. The hallway had 2 more closed doors on the left and right, and at the end, a single door leading into what felt like a large room. We checked the side doors. The first was an empty bedroom, dust everywhere. A single, child-sized wooden chair overturned in the corner. The second side door was a utility closet, filled with ancient tools and a disturbing array of rusted chains hanging from the ceiling. Then we reached the main door at the end of the impossible hallway. I put my ear against it. Nothing. I pushed it open. We were back in the living room. Not a similar room, but the exact same living room we had just left. The single dusty armchair, the side table, the 5 white doors, and the open front door leading outside. The difference was small, but significant. The small side table next to the armchair, which I had noticed before was angled parallel to the wall, was now skewed slightly to the right, as if someone had nudged it a moment ago. Rodriguez stared at the 5 doors, then at the open front door, then back at the door we had just come through. His breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. "Sarge, no, that's physically impossible. We walked 40 feet into the house. We should be in the backyard." "Oh." I felt the cold sweat on my back, the familiar, awful sensation of being utterly disoriented. This wasn't a structural anomaly. It was a fundamental breakdown of space and logic. It was like the house was breathing, rearranging itself the moment we were out of sight. I pointed to the door we had just used. "We're not leaving through that again. We take the stairs." We moved to door #3, the staircase. As I put my foot on the first step, we heard a sound that was not in my head. Not a loop, but real. A slow, grinding thump-thump coming from behind the door we had just left the door to the impossible hallway. It sounded like something large and heavy was being dragged across the uncreaking floorboards of the dead space. And then, a faint, tiny sound that cut through the silence, like the sound of ice cracking. A child's muffled cry. It was behind one of the closed white doors, but I couldn't tell which one. It sounded like it was behind all of them. The sound of the child's cry, muffled, desperate, and fragile, snapped me out of the geometric horror of the repeating rooms. This was no longer an architectural curiosity or a psychological puzzle. It was a rescue scenario. The thump-thump of the dragging continued from the impossible hallway, but the child's cry was the immediate priority. "Rodriguez, cover the stairs," I commanded, my voice strained but firm. "The cry is coming from downstairs. We have to check the doors again." Rodriguez, now terrified, raised his weapon toward the staircase, shaking his head. No, Sarge, that sound. It's a setup. This whole place is a trap. We should breach and call for backup." "This isn't normal." "A child is crying, Rodriguez. Forget what's normal. We're going in." I went to the 5 doors again, moving faster this time. The side table in the living room was now perfectly parallel to the wall again, as if the house was correcting its own subtle error. I tried the pantry, door shown, again, empty. The coat closet, door #2, empty. The bathroom, door #4, empty. The cry was louder now, a frantic, choked sob. It sounded like a small child trying to scream into a pillow. It was definitely coming from the direction of the 5th door, the one that led back to the impossible hallway. I ran to door #5. Before I could put my hand on the knob, the thump-thump of the dragging abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and expectant. I took a deep breath. "Sheriff's Department, open the door! We know someone is in here." No answer, only the frantic, tiny cries from the other side of the wood. I kicked the door hard, right below the lock. It burst inward with a shattering crack. I charged in, gun first. The impossible hallway was still there, stretching unnaturally into the dark, but it was no longer empty. Halfway down the hall, sitting on the floor, was a small wooden crate. A crude, square box, used for transporting heavy goods. And emanating from within the crate was the sound of the desperate, muffled crying. I moved quickly, ignoring the irrational fear that the door behind me would vanish. I reached the crate and dropped to my knees, shining my light directly onto it. The top of the crate was secured with heavy-duty metal strapping, the kind used on industrial pallets. "I'm with the police, kid. Hang on, I'm getting you out." I grabbed the strapping, but my fingers couldn't get a grip. It was too tight, too professional a job. I radioed back. "Rodriguez, I've located the source of the cry. It's a child, sealed in a box in a hallway. Bring me the heavy cutters now. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, high-pitched and strained. Sarge, I can't. The stairs, they're gone. The landing is just a wall now. I'm locked in the living room with the front door. I didn't look back. The house had shifted again. I was completely alone in the impossible space with the crying child and whatever had been dragging something heavy down the hall. My sidearm was useless. I needed leverage. I remembered the utility closet from my previous pass. I ran back down the hall to the second door on the left, which I knew led to the closet full of old tools and chains. I wrenched the door open, grabbed a rusty, heavy crowbar from a hook, and ran back to the crate. The child's cries had become weaker, turning into soft, exhausted whimpers. I jammed the crowbar under the metal strapping and pulled, straining against the rusted metal. The strapping screeched and finally gave way with a whip-like sound. I ripped the top off the crate. I shone my light inside. The crate was not empty. It was filled with cheap, store-bought ceramic dolls, the kind with vacant, glassy eyes and fixed, painted smiles. They were packed tightly in straw, and on top of them, resting on the last doll's painted face, was an old, small cassette recorder. And it was the cassette recorder that was playing the child's cry, on a tight, repeating loop. The psychological horror was instant and complete. There was no child. There was never a child. The sounds, the thump-thump, the cries, the vanishing staircase, it had all been a performance. Not for the audience of a sound artist, but for me. This person knew the protocols of a police officer responding to a welfare check. They knew the emotional pressure point. I stood up, staring back down the hallway, crowbar in hand. The darkness felt thick, like a physical presence. The child's whimper was still playing, sickeningly, from the box of dolls. Then, from the darkness at the far end of the hallway, past where the box sat, a figure stepped out. It was a man, thin and gaunt, dressed in simple dark clothing. His head was cocked slightly, and I couldn't make out his features in the low light, but I could see the shape of something long and heavy in his hand. He wasn't running. He was just standing there, watching my reaction. I raised my gun, shaking now from fear, rage, and the complete violation of my emotional reality. Sheriff's Department, drop the weapon. Get on the ground. The man didn't move. He simply raised the heavy object he was holding, a 2x4 piece of lumber, and brought it down on the side of the hallway wall. The sound was thunderous. The impact didn't shatter the wall. It made the whole impossible space shudder. And when I lowered my light to look at the man, he was gone. But I noticed what was on the wall. Not a hole, but an opening. A new, closed white door had appeared, perfectly integrated into the wall where the man had struck it. It was a new door, a new way to go. I heard a muffled shriek from the living room. Rodriguez was outside, kicking at the door, yelling for me. I had to get out. I didn't check the new door. I ran back toward the front of the house, scrambling over the ruined door frame. When I burst back into the living room, Rodriguez was gone. The front door was wide open, and I could hear him screaming my name, but the sound was coming from outside the front door. I ran out. He was standing in the middle of the street, shaking uncontrollably, pointing back at the house. The yellow house was normal again. The side table was still set. The hallway door #5, was closed, but undamaged. The light upstairs was now burning steadily, normally, and the front door was gently, unnervingly swinging shut. The team came back, checked the house, and found nothing. No box, no cassette recorder, no man. They only found a slightly splintered door frame on the fifth door, which they blamed on an overly zealous patrolman. Rodriguez took a permanent leave of absence the next day. I stayed on, but I can't shake the knowledge that the world we walk through is not a fixed map, and that there are people out there whose only goal is to bend your reality until you are lost forever in their labyrinth. I still drive past that house on patrol sometimes, and every time I do, I count the doors on the outside, praying the number hasn't changed. It had been 3 months since the House of Doors. I was working alone now, a patrol preference I had requested. After the psychological gymnastics of the last 2 calls, I needed the solitude of the cruiser, the predictability of the night shift, and the quiet comfort of my own thoughts. No skeptics, no overreactors, just me and the road. The department psychologist chalked up my previous experiences to stress and sleep deprivation. I just nodded and kept the truth locked away. The truth was, I now saw the world as a place where the rules could be broken by design, and that real horror lived in the subtle manipulation of certainty. My new sector was the long, desolate stretch of Interstate 87 that cuts through the less populated western edge of Bergen County, more mountains, more trees, and long, dark miles between exits. The calls were typically car accidents, stalled semi-trucks, and the occasional hiker who got lost in the woods bordering the highway. It was 4 a.m. on a freezing cold January night. The temperature gauge read 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was so dry and clear that the stars felt close enough to touch. I was nursing a lukewarm coffee when dispatch called in a strange one. A 911 call reporting a possible suicide on the shoulder of the highway, mile marker 184. The caller was a trucker, already miles past the location, who reported seeing a figure, a woman standing calmly on the outside of the concrete barrier, looking down the embankment before the semi's lights moved past. The trucker said she was wearing a thin, white dress in 15-degree weather. I hit the lights and the siren, cutting through the silence of the highway. A woman in a white dress, standing on a suicide ledge in the middle of the night. It was a recipe for adrenaline. I arrived at mile marker 184. The road was a sheer black ribbon. The embankment on the west side of the highway dropped steeply into a thick, dark forest. I pulled over and immediately saw the figure. She was exactly as described. A woman, slender, wearing a white cotton summer dress that was almost translucent in my spotlight. She was standing on the narrow shoulder, hugging herself, her back to me, facing the guardrail. She wasn't moving, not even a tremble, despite the cold. She radiated stillness. I grabbed my thermal blanket, my flashlight, and my radio. I moved slowly, my boots crunching on the frozen gravel. "Ma'am," I said, my voice measured and calm. "I'm a police officer. I'm here to help. It's freezing out here. Please, step away from the railing." She didn't move. No flinch, no acknowledgement of my presence. I took a step closer. The wind picked up a high-pitched, desolate moan that seemed to come from the top of the dark pine trees below. "Ma'am, I need you to talk to me. Are you okay? Just turn around and take my hand." The woman slowly, painstakingly, turned her head. What I saw was not a face contorted by grief or despair. It was a face completely blank. Her skin was pale white, almost phosphorescent, and her eyes were wide, black pools that seemed to reflect the entire night sky. She looked less like a person and more like an ice sculpture of a human being. Then she spoke. Her voice was not a shout or a cry. It was a dry, brittle whisper that was somehow perfectly audible over the wind and the distant highway noise. "I don't need the light," she whispered, her black eyes staring directly into the lens of my high-powered flashlight. The air around her was colder than the ambient temperature. It felt like standing next to an open freezer. "I know it's cold, ma'am. That's why I want you to get in my car." She didn't address my words. She just whispered one single word, a word that didn't make sense, but felt profoundly disturbing. "Echo." And then she spoke again, but the voice wasn't hers. It was an older man's voice, rough and tired, like a truck driver's voice. She was standing calmly on the outside of the concrete barrier, looking down the embankment. It was the trucker's exact 911 report. Her lips had moved, but the sound was a man's voice, a man miles away. In the past. I froze. My mind immediately went to the watcher in the woods, to the recordings and the loops. Was this another sound trick? Another playback? "Who are you?" I demanded, taking a small step back, my hand on my sidearm, now acutely aware of the sheer blackness of the woods below the railing. The woman smiled, a slow, unsettling movement of her pale lips that didn't reach her black eyes, and she answered in a new voice. A young woman's voice, high-pitched and frightened, the kind of voice you hear from a victim. "I don't know where I am. The phone won't dial out. He locked all the doors." I felt a sickening wave of nausea. That voice, that exact phrasing, it was the phantom voice I'd heard during the silent 911 calls that led me to the House of Doors. The woman in the white dress was not speaking. She was simply transmitting the voices of the lost, the recorded, the terrified. "Stop playing games," I growled, tightening my grip on my flashlight. I'm calling in backup. If you're trying to lure me over that railing, it won't work." She laughed. It was not a woman's laugh. It was a child's giggle, faint and pure, the exact sound of the cassette recording I had found in the box of dolls. Hey, you didn't scream." Every line of certainty I had built since the last two incidents shattered. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a setup. This was something that knew me, knew my darkest moments, and was using the voices of my history to lure me into a psychological ambush. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to bring my heart rate down. "I'm giving you one last chance. Get away from the railing." "Izuri." She slowly raised her arm and pointed not at me, but straight down at the guardrail, where the frozen metal was covered in a thin layer of frost. "Listen," she whispered, now in my own voice, strained and panicked. The voice I had used when I first saw the Watcher's setup. "I can't shake the knowledge that the world we walk through is not a fixed map." I felt the blood drain from my face. My breath hitched in my throat. I hadn't told anyone that phrase. It was a private thought, a reflection I'd written in my own journal to process the horror. She knew my deepest fear. She was my deepest fear. The woman in the white dress stood there, a chilling amalgamation of my past horrors. The highway wind whipping the thin cotton fabric around her legs. The sound of my own voice, raw with the philosophical terror I had felt in the House of Doors, played through her, an intimate violation. I can't shake the knowledge that the world we walk through is not a fixed map. I felt a primal urge to run, to sprint back to the safety of the cruiser and drive until the sun rose. But I was a police officer, and this was an active scene, no matter how profoundly wrong it was. My training, my sense of duty, was the only thin layer of ice keeping me from falling into the black, psychological abyss she represented. I raised my sidearm. "You are under arrest for public endangerment and harassment. Drop your hands and get on the ground." My voice was firm, but my hand was shaking so violently that the muzzle bobbed slightly in the glare of the spotlight. The woman didn't move. She didn't even flinch. She simply tilted her head back and let out a new sound. It wasn't a voice. It was a high-pitched, sustained metallic screech, the sound of an overloaded parabolic microphone feeding back, the very sound I imagined the Watcher used to drive his victims to panic. The sound was unbearable. It felt like a physical assault on my inner ear, forcing all my fear, all my uncertainty, into the forefront of my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut against the pane, dropping my flashlight, which spun wildly on the frozen gravel. When the screech finally stopped, I forced my eyes open. The woman was still there, but she had moved one step closer to the guardrail. She looked down the steep, wooded embankment. "They are down there," she whispered. And this time the voice was a chilling chorus, a mixture of the trucker's drawl, the child's giggle, and the young woman's frantic plea, all speaking the same words at once. I knew it was the lure, the final, desperate move, to get me to follow her over the edge. I took a step forward, fighting the psychological pull of the voices. "I'm not looking down there. I'm looking at you." She laughed, a sickening, multi-tone sound. Then, she slowly, deliberately, put her left hand on the guardrail. "You were supposed to find them long ago," she whispered, in the voice of a calm, disappointed partner, Miller's voice. "Why didn't you look closer? Why didn't you check the woods?" It was the ultimate guilt trip, tapping into the core cop fear, the failure to protect, the failure to see the real clue. She was attacking my integrity. I was breathing in shallow, rapid gasps. I couldn't take my eyes off her, but my periphery was filled with the looming black presence of the forest below. I took the only action I could think of. I wasn't going to tackle her. I wasn't going to fire. I was going to break the loop. I turned away from her, toward the highway, toward the safety of the cruiser, my back to the ultimate, personalized horror. "I am calling this in," I shouted into the dark, my voice cracking. "I am reporting a breach of personal information and an active psychological attack. I am retreating to my vehicle and maintaining observation. If you move, I will fire." I didn't wait for her to reply with another stolen voice. I walked backward slowly, my weapon trained on her white, still figure. When I reached the cruiser, I fumbled for the driver's door handle. My hand was covered in frost and shaking too much to open it. And then I heard a sound that finally broke me. It was the click of a safety being released, the distinct, mechanical sound of my own weapon. It came from directly behind my left ear. I spun around, leveling my gun at the woman. She was still standing by the guardrail, her hands empty, her face still blank. The sound hadn't come from her. The sound had come from the other side of my cruiser, the passenger window. I slowly turned my head, my peripheral vision catching the movement. Standing less than 3 feet from me, in the full, blinding glare of my cruiser's spotlight, was a figure. A man, thin and tall, dressed in dark clothing, the same man I had seen in the impossible hallway of the House of Doors. He was holding a police-issue Glock, my backup weapon. The one is kept secured and loaded in the glove compartment. The passenger door, which I had been absolutely certain I had locked, was ajar. The man didn't move. He didn't speak in a stolen voice. He just looked at me with a slight, almost imperceptible smile. And then, he slowly brought the muzzle of my gun up to his own temple. The woman in the white dress, behind me, finally spoke in her own voice. It was the sound of a sigh, a long, weary exhalation. He always gets tired of waiting. The man's thumb reached up and pulled the hammer back, engaging the trigger mechanism. I screamed, a raw, desperate, animal sound that tore from my throat. My psychological architecture collapsed. The voices, the impossible doors, the stolen thoughts, it all culminated in this final, terrifying moment of witnessing a death that was meant to be my own. The scream was the performance. Just before the gunshot could tear through the cold night air, I threw myself sideways, into the dark passenger side of the cruiser, slamming the door shut with my shoulder. The sound wasn't the sharp pop of a handgun, it was the sound of my headlight shattering. I scrambled to the driver's seat, threw the gear shift into drive, and floored the accelerator, not even looking in the rearview mirror. I drove for 20 minutes before I could pull over and call in. The official report stated a collision with a deer had shattered my headlight, and that the missing backup weapon must have been misplaced in the frenzy of the emergency. They found nothing at mile marker 184. No woman, no man, no prints, no evidence of a struggle. They did, however, find my empty holster, which I had forgotten to check. My weapon was gone. I left the department a month later. I still haven't recovered. I live in a small, secure apartment, and I keep the windows closed. But sometimes, when I wake up in the dead of night, I can still hear it. Not a scream, not a gunshot, not a metallic tap. Just the sound of my own breathing, played back from a deep, cold silence, waiting for the world to shatter.